Growing up in our modest two-story house, I learned early on that my sister Lisa was different. Special, as my parents would say. I was 6 when she was born, and from the very beginning, everything in our household revolved around her delicate health. "Sarah, close that window right now," Mom would shout from downstairs. "Your sister might catch a cold." This was the soundtrack of my childhood, a constant reminder that Lisa's well-being was everyone's primary concern. I remember the first time I really understood how different our roles would be. I was 12, and Lisa had just started elementary school. She came home one day with a runny nose, nothing serious, but you'd think she had pneumonia from how my parents reacted. "This is your fault, Sarah," Dad's words cut through me like a knife. "You must have left the door open too long when you went to school this morning." I wanted to argue that Lisa had probably caught it from one of her classmates, like any normal kid would, but I knew better than to speak up. Instead, I just nodded and accepted my punishment of being grounded for the weekend. That same year, Mom started delegating household chores. While other kids my age were playing after school, I was learning how to properly dust furniture, vacuum carpets, and even do laundry. "But Mom, why doesn't Lisa have to help?" I asked one day, watching my sister sprawled on the couch watching TV while I folded what felt like mountains of clothes. Mom's response was quick and sharp. "Your sister has a weak immune system, Sarah. The doctors say she shouldn't overexert herself. Besides, you're so good at these things already." That became the pattern of our lives. If something needed doing, I did it. If something went wrong, it was my fault. When Lisa got a D in math in 4th grade, Dad grounded me for a week because I should have helped her study better. When she broke Mom's favorite coffee mug, somehow it was because I should have been watching her more carefully. I remember one particularly frustrating incident when Lisa was 10 and I was 16. She had taken my favorite sweater without asking and spilled juice all over it. When I complained to Mom, she just sighed and said, "Sarah, you should have put it somewhere she couldn't reach it. You know how careless she can be." That was the moment I started dreaming about college, about escape. I threw myself into my studies, knowing that education was my ticket to freedom. Every time I felt overwhelmed by the unfairness at home, I channeled that energy into my schoolwork. My teachers noticed my dedication, and my grades were excellent. But at home, even my academic success was somehow twisted to highlight Lisa's struggles. "See how easy it is for Sarah?" Mom would say to Lisa. "You just need to try harder, sweetie." But Lisa never had to try harder, because there were always excuses ready for why she couldn't succeed, and I was always there to pick up her slack. The day I graduated high school, everything changed. I had already accepted that college wasn't in my future, we weren't exactly rolling in money, and I figured any savings would go to Lisa's education. I'd been looking at job listings, planning to work at the local diner while taking some community college classes on the side. That evening, after all the graduation ceremonies were done, Mom and Dad called me into the living room. Lisa was sprawled on the couch as usual, playing on her phone. "Sarah, sit down," Dad said, his voice unusually serious. "We need to talk about your future." My stomach clenched. Here it comes, I thought. The lecture about responsibility, about helping the family, about putting my dreams on hold. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "We've been saving," she said, sliding it across the coffee table. "Ever since you were little." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a bank statement showing an account in my name with enough money for 4 years at State College. But I thought. I stammered, looking between them and the paper in my hands. "We can see how well you're doing," Mom explained, glancing briefly at Lisa, who was pretending not to listen. "And Lisa, well, college might not be in her future. We thought this money would be better spent on you." I was speechless. For the first time in my life, I was getting something that Lisa wasn't. It felt strange, almost wrong after all these years. "But," Dad added, his tone growing stern, "we need you to promise us something." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "When you finish college and get a good job, you'll help the family. Don't forget about your sister." Of course, I said quickly, still stunned by this turn of events. I promise. Lisa suddenly got up and stormed out of the room, slamming her door upstairs. Mom sighed but didn't follow her, a stark contrast to how they usually coddled her every mood. That fall, I packed my bags and headed to State College, 3 states away. The distance felt like freedom. For the first time in my life, I could open windows without worrying about anyone catching a cold. I could study without being interrupted to help with chores or watch Lisa. 2 months before graduation, I received an offer I couldn't refuse, a position at Anderson & Global, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The salary was excellent, and the opportunity was too good to pass up. When I told my parents, they were surprisingly understanding about me not coming back home. I found a decent apartment not far from the office and settled into my new life. I kept in regular contact with my family, calling them every weekend. Our conversations usually centered around Lisa, how she was still finding herself after high school, not working, not in college, just existing. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't responsible for fixing that situation. 3 years into my job at Anderson & Global, Mom called with that tone in her voice, the one she always used when she wanted something. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone lit up with her name. "Sarah, honey," she began, her voice sweet as honey. "You know Lisa's been having such a hard time finding work." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was going. "Your company is so successful," she continued. "Couldn't you put in a good word for your sister? Maybe get her a position there? She's very smart, you know that." My stomach twisted into knots. How could I explain that Lisa, who hadn't worked a day in her life and hadn't gone to college, wouldn't make it past the first round of applications at a firm like Anderson & Global? "Well," I said carefully, "we do have some openings. Let me send over the application form so Lisa can see what the requirements are." That evening, I forwarded the standard application form to Lisa's email. The requirements were crystal clear: bachelor's degree required, proficiency in SAP and Oracle systems, fluent in 2 foreign languages besides English, minimum 5 years of relevant experience preferred. After that, Mom stopped asking about getting Lisa a job at my company. Life went on. I worked hard, got promoted twice, and started building up a decent savings account. The thought of buying my own place began to take shape: no more rent, a place to truly call my own. 2 years later, I decided to visit home for the first time in months. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling in places. Lisa was still living there, sprawled on the same couch, scrolling through her phone, just like when we were teenagers. Over dinner, I shared my plans. "I've been saving up," I said, pushing my peas around the plate. "I'm thinking about buying an apartment. The market's good right now, and with my credit score, I could get a decent mortgage rate." The table went quiet. Mom and Dad exchanged looks, while Lisa suddenly seemed very interested in her mashed potatoes. A week later, Mom called. Her voice was different this time, worried, almost desperate. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," she began. "Your father's not doing well. His back is acting up again, and he can't take those extra shifts at work anymore." I listened as she listed their troubles: the leaking roof, outdated plumbing, walls that needed painting. Each problem came with a price tag attached. "We're barely making ends meet," she said, her voice cracking. "And after all we did for you, honey, the college money, giving you a chance at a good life. Now it's time for you to help your family, Sarah. We need you." There it was. The reminder of my debt to them, the obligation I'd promised to fulfill all those years ago. The dream of my own apartment seemed to fade with each word my mother spoke. After that phone call, I spent several sleepless nights thinking about my parents' situation. The guilt ate at me. Here I was, planning to buy an apartment while they couldn't even fix their leaking roof. Finally, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Mom back on a Sunday morning. "I've been thinking about what you said," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to help. I'm going to give you access to my account." You can spend up to $1,500 per month. That should cover the repairs and help with the bills." The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought we'd lost connection. Then Mom's voice came back, thick with emotion. "Sarah, that's so generous. It's such a large amount, we probably won't even need that much. Just enough for the basic repairs and some groceries." I walked her through setting up the access on her phone. "Just remember the limit," I reminded her. $1,500 per month. Of course, she assured me. "We'll be very careful with it." The first few months went smoothly. I was busy at work and barely checked the account activity, but when I did glance at it, I saw modest withdrawals, $700 here, $800 there. Mostly hardware stores, grocery shops, and utility payments. It seemed like they were being responsible with the money, just as Mom had promised. But then things started to change. The amounts began creeping up gradually, $900 one month, $1,100 the next. I tried not to worry about it. After all, they were still under the limit, and home repairs could be expensive. Then came the notification that changed everything. I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed with an alert I'd set up for large purchases, $2,000 charge at Luxe Boutique. I nearly dropped my phone. That couldn't be right. As soon as the meeting ended, I pulled up my account details. There it was in black and white, a $2,000 purchase at one of the most expensive clothing stores in their area. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I'd never even shopped there myself. With my apartment savings goal, I couldn't justify spending that much on clothes. My hands were shaking as I dialed Mom's number. "Mom, I just got a notification about a $2,000 purchase at Luxe Boutique," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "What's going on?" There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "Oh, that. Well, you know my birthday's coming up next month," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. I saw this absolutely gorgeous dress, and I thought, well, I've been feeling so down lately with all our troubles. I just wanted to treat myself a little. "Okay," I said, wanting to avoid an argument. "Just, please stick to the limit we agreed on." "Of course, honey," she said quickly. Then added, "By the way, I'm still looking forward to my birthday present from you. You haven't forgotten, have you?" I sat there after hanging up, staring at the account activity on my screen. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. This wasn't just about a dress, this was about something else, something I wasn't seeing yet. From here I started checking my account more regularly, setting up detailed transaction alerts on my phone. What I saw made my stomach churn. The spending pattern was escalating at an alarming rate. Mom had blown past the $1,500 limit like it didn't exist. One month it was $2,000, then $2,500, and before I knew it, some months were hitting $4,000. My savings account, which I'd been nurturing for years with dreams of my own home, was shrinking instead of growing. One evening, after seeing yet another large transaction, I pulled up my account on my laptop and created a spreadsheet. The numbers were right there in black and white. In just a few months, they'd spent more than I had in an entire year. My own monthly expenses were modest: rent, utilities, groceries, and the occasional dinner out with colleagues. I drove a used car, bought my clothes on sale, and packed my lunch most days. Meanwhile, my parents were supposedly spending thousands on what exactly? I decided it was time for a visit. I needed to see these home improvements for myself. "Mom," I said when I called her, "I'm thinking of coming home next weekend. It'll be nice to celebrate your birthday in person, and I'd love to see that dress you bought. Plus, you can show me all the repairs you've done to the house." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom finally spoke, her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "Oh no, honey, don't come," she said quickly. "I'm not really celebrating my birthday this year. I'm not feeling up to it. But Mom, I haven't been home in months, and I'd really like to see." "No," she cut me off sharply, then immediately softened her tone. It's just not a good time, Sarah. But you can send my birthday gift by mail if you'd like. That call set off every alarm bell in my head. I spent the entire night going through 6 months of bank statements, line by line. The more I looked, the less sense it made. There were charges from stores I knew my mother would never shop at, restaurants that stayed open until 2 a.m., bars I'd never heard of. The home repair expenses were there, but they were tiny compared to everything else: $150 at Home Depot, $200 at a plumbing supply store. These were dwarfed by charges from high-end boutiques, jewelry stores, and electronics shops. Someone had bought a $1,200 smartphone last month. My mother still used the same flip phone she'd had for years, saying she didn't need anything fancy. The pattern started emerging like a picture coming into focus. Teenage bars, nightclubs, designer clothing stores, makeup shops, nail salons. These weren't the expenses of my aging parents who could barely make ends meet. These were the expenses of someone else entirely, someone young, someone who liked to party, someone who had expensive taste and no job of their own. Lisa. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those times Mom had talked about the leaking roof and broken plumbing, all those guilt trips about helping the family, it had been a smokescreen. My supposedly struggling parents weren't using my money to repair their house. They were funding my sister's extravagant lifestyle. I felt sick to my stomach as I scrolled through transaction after transaction. A $300 spa day. A $500 shopping spree at a designer outlet. $200 bar tabs multiple times a week. This was why Mom didn't want me to visit. There were no major repairs to see, no improvements to show off. Just Lisa, living it up on my dime while I pinched pennies and put off my own dreams. I spent the next morning rehearsing what I would say, pacing my apartment with my phone in hand. Finally, around noon, I made the call. "Mom," I said as soon as she answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk about where my money is really going." There was a long pause on the other end. "What do you mean, honey?" "I think you know exactly what I mean." I took a deep breath. "The bars, the designer clothes, the new smartphone, those aren't your expenses, are they?" "They're Lisa's." I heard her inhale sharply, then let out a long sigh. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, no more sweet talk, no more pretense. "Well, what did you expect?" she said defensively. "We're family. Lisa needs nice things too. She can't help it if she hasn't found her path yet." "Mom, you lied to me. You told me the money was for house repairs." "We did use some of it for repairs," she interrupted. "But Sarah, you have so much, and Lisa has so little. Besides, you owe us. Or have you forgotten who paid for your fancy college education?" I almost laughed. I'd been expecting this, the ultimate guilt card. But I was prepared. "Actually, Mom, I ran the numbers last night. Every single expense for the past 2 years. Would you like to know what I found?" I pulled up my spreadsheet. "In the past 24 months, you've spent $72,000 of my money. That's more than what you and Dad paid for my college tuition, plus interest. So no, I don't owe you anything anymore." The line went quiet. Then, without another word, Mom hung up. Almost on autopilot, I opened Facebook and typed in Lisa's name. I hadn't looked at her profile in months. I'd been too busy working, too focused on my own life. Now I scrolled through post after post, my anger growing with each swipe. There she was, posing in the $2,000 dress from Luxe Boutique, the one Mom had claimed was for her birthday. There was Lisa at some resort last month, lounging by a pool with a fancy cocktail. Photo after photo of parties, clubs, and restaurants I recognized from my bank statements. She was even wearing the expensive jewelry I'd unknowingly paid for, tagging herself at all the upscale places she'd visited with my money. I needed more information, so I called Aunt Marie, who had always been the family truth teller, the one person who never bought into the Lisa can do no wrong narrative. "Aunt Marie, I need to ask you something," I said. "Have you been to my parents' house lately?" Have they done any repairs? She let out a bitter laugh. Repairs? The only thing that's changed is the house is getting worse. Your father won't even fix the broken step on the front porch. Why do you ask? I explained about the money I'd been sending, about the supposed repairs. With each word, Aunt Marie's sighs grew deeper. Oh, Sarah, she said finally. That money's not going to repairs. Lisa doesn't work, doesn't even look for jobs anymore. Just parties all the time. She paused. And now she's trying to drag my Jenny into that lifestyle too. Keeps inviting her to these wild parties, telling her how much fun it is to live free and easy. My stomach was already in knots, but what she said next made my blood run cold. There's something else you should know, Aunt Marie continued, her voice dropping. Jenny told me this in confidence, but you need to hear it. Lisa's been showing around a letter of recommendation supposedly from you. Says she interned at your company under your supervision. Jenny saw it, it has your signature and everything. Lisa's planning to use it to apply at Carlton Industries. The room started spinning. A forged letter of recommendation? With my signature? If Lisa got caught, and she would get caught, it wouldn't just be her reputation on the line. It would be mine, my company's. Everything I'd worked for could be destroyed. I hung up with Aunt Marie and immediately called Carlton Industries' HR department. My hands were shaking as I explained the situation. I need to report a fraudulent letter of recommendation, I said. My sister is applying for a position using a forged letter in my name. I never wrote it, never signed it, and she has never worked at my company. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, my phone exploded with calls from my parents. When I finally answered, Mom's screaming voice nearly burst my eardrums. How dare you sabotage your sister's career, she shrieked. She was about to get that job at Carlton Industries. Mom, she forged my signature. She was finally trying to make something of herself. Mom continued as if I hadn't spoken. And you ruined it. You've always been jealous of her. I heard shuffling, then Dad's voice came on the line, angrier than I'd ever heard him. Lisa's been crying for 2 days straight because of you, he growled. Is that what you wanted? To hurt your sister? Well, congratulations. You're no daughter of mine. Consider yourself disowned. Dad, she committed fraud. If you ever want us to forgive you, he cut me off, his voice cold and calculating, you'll need to start sending us more money. Much more than before. Maybe then, someday, we might consider forgiving you for what you've done to your sister. My father's words were the last straw. Years of manipulation, guilt, and unfairness crashed over me in that moment, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. No, I said firmly into the phone. I don't owe you anything anymore. I helped you selflessly, and you lied to me. If you need money so badly now, why don't you ask Lisa to help? She's the one you've been spending all that money on anyway. Before they could respond, I hung up. With shaking hands, I opened my banking app and permanently revoked my mother's access to my account. As I pressed the confirm button, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, and a new one settle in my stomach. I knew what was coming. The call started the next morning. How could you do this to us? Mom's voice screeched through my voicemail. After everything we've done for you. You selfish bitch, Lisa's message followed. You think you're so much better than everyone else with your fancy job and your perfect life. I deleted the messages without listening to the end. But they kept coming, day after day. Text messages, voicemails, emails, all filled with insults, guilt trips, and demands to restore their access to my money. Each one more desperate and angry than the last. I blocked their numbers, but they started calling from different phones. I blocked those too. A week into the barrage, Aunt Marie called. Sarah, honey, she said gently. I wanted to warn you, your parents are calling everyone in the family. They're telling everyone what a terrible daughter you are, how you abandoned them in their time of need. She paused. I know the truth, and so does Jenny. We've tried telling them they're wrong, but they won't listen. I just wanted you to know what they're doing. That was 3 months ago. Now, my life has settled into a new normal. My savings account is growing again. It's amazing how quickly money accumulates when it's not being drained by others. I've started seriously looking at apartments, going to viewings on weekends. Last week, I even met with a mortgage advisor. The calls have mostly stopped, though I still get the occasional message from a new number. I delete them without reading them now. Sometimes I wonder about my parents, if Dad's back is really getting worse, if Mom is still covering for Lisa's excesses. I wonder if Lisa ever tried to forge anyone else's signature, or if she's still living the high life on someone else's dime. But mostly, I focus on my own life. I work, I save, I spend time with friends who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. I'm learning to stop feeling guilty for taking care of myself first. Will I ever speak to my family again? I honestly don't know. Maybe someday things will be different. Maybe someday they'll understand what they did wrong, or I'll find it in my heart to forgive them even if they don't. But for now, I'm focused on building the life I want, one that isn't weighed down by guilt, obligation, or other people's expectations.
This story is titled, When My Dad Passed, My Sister Blew Through Her Part of the Inheritance on Vacations and a Fancy Stuff. Then she demanded I hand over mine to pay for her husband's medical bills. I refused, so she tried to sue me and my aunt for control of it. And yeah, that shit blew up in her face. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now, let's start the video. I've spent lots of time scrolling through Reddit, reading stories and thinking, that could never happen to me. But now, with everything that's gone down, I feel like my story deserves to be here. It's a mess, here it goes. Growing up, Maddie always acted like she ran the show. She's 27 now, married to this dude Jason, who's basically her arrogance in male form. Meanwhile, I'm 17 and finishing high school, living with Aunt Susan after Dad passed away because Maddie's too busy throwing tantrums to deal with real life. Oh, and Maddie and Aunt Susan? They've never gotten along. They've been enemies since, forever. To explain this properly, Maddie's a control freak. She's the kind of person who loves being in control. When we were kids, she'd take over everything. Game night? Maddie had to pick the game. Movie night? It had to be Maddie's favorite movie. And if she didn't get her way, cue the world's most passive-aggressive tantrum. It worked most of the time, except with Aunt Susan. Aunt Susan didn't play Maddie's games, and Maddie hated that. I still remember this one time when we were younger. Dad was sick, and Aunt Susan came over to help out. Maddie was supposed to be doing the dishes, but instead, she was texting Jason and pretending not to hear anyone. Aunt Susan, being Aunt Susan, told Maddie to get off her butt and finish her chores. Maddie rolled her eyes and muttered something like, "You're not my mom." Aunt Susan didn't miss a beat. She said, "No, but I'm not your maid either, so get moving." Maddie did the dishes, but she slammed every plate and cup like she wanted to shatter them all. Afterwards, she ranted to me about how Aunt Susan was always on her case and trying to act like she's in charge. I didn't say anything, but honestly, Aunt Susan was right. Maddie's resentment of Aunt Susan only grew as we got older. Aunt Susan would show up to help Dad with stuff Maddie should have been doing. She'd drive him to doctor's appointments, help with bills, and make sure there was food in the fridge. Maddie called it interfering. She said Aunt Susan was trying to control the family. I called it stepping up. Maddie didn't want to see it that way because it made her look bad. By the time Jason entered the picture, Maddie had perfected her golden child act. Jason worshipped her, and she loved having someone who thought she could do no wrong. Aunt Susan, of course, didn't like Jason from the start. She said he was arrogant and fake, which, spoiler, he was. But Maddie didn't care. She acted like Jason was the best thing that ever happened to her and ignored everyone who disagreed. Jason wasn't just arrogant. He was a full-blown jerk. Every time he came over, he had something snarky to say. If Dad cooked dinner, Jason would make a comment like, "Well, this is interesting." If I mentioned my plans for med school, he'd laugh and say, "Better have a backup plan, kid. Not everyone's cut out for that." Maddie never stood up for me. She just laughed along, like Jason's rudeness was some kind of joke. Aunt Susan, on the other hand, didn't hold back. She'd shut Jason down with a sharp comment, or just straight up ignore him, which drove him nuts. Maddie's relationship with Aunt Susan got worse after she married Jason. She barely showed up to family gatherings. And when she did, it was only to make some dramatic exit after arguing with Aunt Susan. I remember one Thanksgiving where Maddie started ranting about how some people in the family didn't respect her marriage. Everyone knew she was talking about Aunt Susan, but Aunt Susan just shrugged and said, "Respect is earned, not demanded." Maddie left in a huff, dragging Jason with her, and we didn't hear from her for months. Despite all this, Aunt Susan never stopped being there for me and Dad. She wasn't just an aunt to me, she was like a second parent, especially with how much Maddie was checked out. While Maddie was busy playing house with Jason, Aunt Susan was the one helping me with homework, driving me to school, and teaching me how to cook something other than mac and cheese. She never made me feel like a burden, even when I was struggling with everything going on with Dad. The truth is, Maddie's hatred of Aunt Susan wasn't really about Aunt Susan. It was about Maddie. Aunt Susan saw Maddie for who she really was, self-centered, manipulative, and not as perfect as she wanted everyone to believe. That scared Maddie because she couldn't control Aunt Susan the way she controlled everyone else. She couldn't charm her, guilt-trip her, or twist her words to make herself look better. And instead of dealing with that, Maddie just labeled Aunt Susan as the enemy. Looking back, it's wild how Maddie could hold on to that grudge for so long. Even after she got married and moved out, she'd still find ways to complain about Aunt Susan. She'd say stuff like, "Why does she always have to be involved?" Or, "I can't stand how she treats me like a kid." Meanwhile, Aunt Susan was the one taking care of everything Maddie couldn't be bothered with, like making sure Dad was okay and keeping the family from falling apart. I didn't realize how bad things would get between them until after Dad passed. That's when Maddie's hatred turned into something else, something meaner, darker. It wasn't just about not liking Aunt Susan anymore. It was about trying to take her down. And trust me, Maddie wasn't done yet. By the time Dad's health really started to decline, I knew things were about to get tough. He'd been dealing with heart problems for as long as I could remember, but in my junior year, it got so bad he couldn't hide it anymore. He'd get winded walking from the kitchen to the living room, and some days he could barely get out of bed. It killed me to see him like that, because Dad was always the strong one, the guy who'd work late shifts and still find time to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. Aunt Susan stepped in right away. She'd always been there for us, but now it was different. She started coming over almost daily, helping with everything from doctor's appointments to making sure Dad actually ate. Maddie, she was nowhere to be found. I tried to keep Maddie updated. I'd text her, call her, leave voicemails. "Dad's not doing great," I'd say. "You should come by and see him." She'd always have an excuse. "Jason's been working late," or "I've got so much going on at work." The one that really pissed me off was, "Let me know if it gets serious." Like, what the hell did she think was happening? Dad was seriously ill, and she couldn't even spare an hour to visit him. I'll never forget the night Dad collapsed in the living room. I was in the kitchen doing homework when I heard a loud thud. I ran in and saw him on the floor, clutching his chest, his face pale and sweaty. I panicked and called 911, then called Aunt Susan. She got there before the ambulance did, her face tight with worry, but calm enough to keep me grounded. "Maddie?" She didn't pick up. I left her a message. "Dad's going to the hospital. You need to come now." That hospital stay was the beginning of the end. Dad was there for weeks, and every day I hoped Maddie would show up. She didn't. Aunt Susan and I were there every day, sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, and trying to keep him comfortable. The nurses knew us by name. Maddie? She didn't even bother to call until the second week, and even then, it wasn't to ask how Dad was doing. It was to complain about how hard her life was with Jason's health issues. Now, here's the thing about Jason. He's got some kind of chronic illness. I don't know much about it because we've never been close, but Maddie liked to bring it up whenever it was convenient for her. "You don't understand how hard it is," she'd say. "Jason's been so sick lately." I get it. Being sick sucks, but she was using it as an excuse to ignore what was happening with Dad. The day Dad passed away, it was just me and Aunt Susan in the room. He'd been in and out of consciousness all day, barely able to speak. I held his hand, and Aunt Susan stroked his hair, telling him it was okay to let go. When he finally stopped breathing, it felt like the whole world stopped. I don't think I've ever cried so hard in my life. Aunt Susan stayed with me the whole time, even as I broke down completely. Maddie didn't even know until hours later. When I finally got through to her, she acted like I was overreacting. "Why didn't you tell me it was this serious?" she said, her voice all fake concern. I wanted to scream. I had been telling her. For weeks. She just didn't care enough to listen. Maddie didn't show up for the funeral either. She said something about Jason not feeling well and how she couldn't leave him alone. Aunt Susan and I handled everything, arranging the service, sorting through Dad's stuff, making sure everything was paid for. Maddie didn't lift a finger. She sent some flowers and a generic sympathy card, but that was it. I was furious, but I didn't have the energy to fight her. I was too busy trying to process the fact that my dad was gone. A few days after the funeral, Aunt Susan sat me down to talk about what would happen next. Your dad left a will, she said. We'll need to go through it with the lawyer. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here for you. I nodded, not really understanding what she meant. At that point, I wasn't even thinking about the will. I was just trying to get through each day without falling apart. When Maddie finally did show up, she acted like nothing had happened. She waltzed into the house like it was just another day, completely ignoring the fact that she'd missed Dad's final moments and his funeral. So what's going on with the will? She asked, like it was no big deal. Aunt Susan just gave her a cold look and said, We'll find out when we meet with the lawyer. It was obvious from the start that Maddie didn't care about anything except the money. She didn't ask about Dad's belongings, his photos, or anything sentimental. She just wanted to know how much she was getting. It made me sick. Aunt Susan, on the other hand, was focused on making sure everything was done the way Dad wanted. She knew how much Dad wanted me to go to med school, and she wasn't going to let Maddie ruin that. By the time we sat down with the lawyer, I was bracing myself for the worst. Maddie had already made it clear that she didn't think Aunt Susan had any right to be involved, but Dad's will said otherwise. Maddie and I were each getting half of the inheritance, but since I wasn't 18 yet, Aunt Susan was named custodian of my share. Maddie's face when she heard that, pure rage. She didn't say anything right then, but I could tell she was fuming. After the meeting, Maddie pulled me aside. You know Aunt Susan doesn't really understand us, right? She said, her voice all sweet and fake. She's always been kind of cold, but we're family, and family should stick together. If you ever need help with the inheritance, just let me know. I didn't say anything, but I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to get me on her side because she couldn't stand that Aunt Susan was in charge. Aunt Susan wasn't having any of it. Later that day, she sat me down and said, I know Maddie's going to try to manipulate you. Don't let her. This money is for your future, and your dad trusted me to protect it. I'm not going to let her take that away from you. I didn't fully understand what Aunt Susan meant at the time, but I trusted her. And thank God I did, because Maddie was about to turn this whole thing into a nightmare. The day we met with the lawyer to go over Dad's will was one of the most awkward days of my life. It wasn't just the sadness of losing Dad. It was knowing that Maddie was going to turn the whole thing into a circus. She strolled into the lawyer's office like she owned the place, dressed in some expensive-looking outfit that screamed, "Look at me," and didn't even bother saying hello to Aunt Susan. She just glanced at me and went, "So, what's the deal? How's this going to work?" The lawyer, Mr. Carter, was an older guy with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He seemed like the type who'd seen it all, which was good because Maddie wasn't exactly subtle about her intentions. He started by going through some legal stuff, but all Maddie cared about was the money. She interrupted him halfway through to ask, "Can you just skip to the part where we find out what we're getting?" Aunt Susan gave her a look that could have frozen lava, but Mr. Carter just nodded and kept it professional. "Your father's estate will be divided equally between the two of you," he said, 50% to each of you. However, since Ethan is still a minor, their share will be managed by Ms. Susan, as designated in the will, until they turn 18. I swear, you could have heard a pin drop. Maddie's smile froze on her face, and for a second, she just stared at him like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Then, in the fakest voice possible, she said, "Oh, that makes sense. Of course, Aunt Susan would be in charge. She's always so responsible." I almost laughed because Maddie couldn't have sounded less genuine if she tried. Aunt Susan didn't say anything, but I could tell she was ready for whatever nonsense Maddie was about to pull. After the meeting, Maddie cornered me in the parking lot. "Hey, just so you know," she said, leaning in like she was about to share some big secret, "you don't have to listen to Aunt Susan about everything. I mean, she's great and all, but we're siblings. We should be making these decisions together." I just nodded, not wanting to start a fight right there. But inside, I was fuming. Maddie had spent years bad-mouthing Aunt Susan, calling her controlling and overbearing, and now she was trying to act like they were best friends? It was so transparent. It was almost pathetic. Aunt Susan must have seen the look on my face when I got into her car because as soon as we pulled out of the parking lot, she asked, "What did she say to you?" "Just the usual," I said. "She thinks we should be making decisions together." Aunt Susan sighed, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. I knew this was coming. Maddie's never been one to let something like this go. Listen to me, Ethan. Your father trusted me to manage this money for a reason. He wanted you to have a future, to go to med school, to have the life he dreamed of for you. Don't let her guilt you into giving that up. I nodded. She was too stubborn to let something like this go without a fight. It didn't take long for Maddie to show her true colors. Over the next few weeks, she started showing up at Aunt Susan's house more often than she ever had before. This was the same Maddie who used to avoid family events if Aunt Susan was going to be there, and now she was dropping by unannounced like it was the most natural thing in the world. She'd bring pastries or flowers, acting all sweet and charming, but it was so fake it made my skin crawl. Family is so important, she said one day while sitting in Aunt Susan's living room, sipping tea like she actually cared about anything other than herself. We've all been through so much, and I just think we need to stick together, you know? Aunt Susan wasn't buying it. What do you need, Maddie? She asked bluntly. Maddie blinked, her fake smile slipping for just a second before she recovered. Nothing. I just wanted to check in, see how you two are doing. Is that so bad? Aunt Susan didn't respond, and the silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Eventually, Maddie stopped pretending and got straight to the point. One afternoon, she showed up at Aunt Susan's house with tears in her eyes and a sob story about Jason's health. Apparently, his chronic illness had taken a turn for the worse, and he needed surgery, expensive surgery that their insurance wouldn't fully cover. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death, Maddie said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. But we're desperate. Jason's been so sick and I don't know what else to do. She turned to me, her eyes wide and pleading. Please, Ethan. Just a small portion of your inheritance. It would mean everything to us. I froze. I didn't know what to say. Jason's health was serious, sure, but this was my inheritance. My future. I'd been saving it for med school, for the life Dad wanted me to have. Giving it to Maddie would mean throwing all of that away. Aunt Susan stepped in before I could respond. That money is for Ethan, Maddie, she said firmly. It's not for you, and it's not for Jason. Your father made that very clear in his will. Maddie's face twisted, her fake sweetness disappearing in an instant. You've always hated me, she snapped. You've been against me since we were kids. This isn't about Dad's wishes. It's about you trying to control everything like you always do. Aunt Susan didn't even flinch. Believe whatever you want, Maddie, she said calmly. But that money isn't going anywhere. Maddie stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I thought that would be the end of it, but I should have known better. Maddie wasn't done, not by a long shot. I thought Maddie storming out of Aunt Susan's house would be the last I'd hear from her for a while, but I was wrong. Maddie doesn't give up easily, especially when she thinks she's been wronged. The thing about Maddie is, she can't stand not being in control. It eats away at her, and when she doesn't get her way, she goes all in, turning up the drama to maximum volume. What I didn't expect was how far she'd take things. It started small, like it always does with Maddie. She sent me a couple of texts the day after she left Aunt Susan's, acting all calm and reasonable. Hey, I know things got heated yesterday, she wrote. I just want you to think about what I said. Jason's surgery isn't optional, it's life or death. We're family, and I know Dad would want you to help. I ignored it at first. I didn't want to engage because I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere good. But Maddie doesn't take silence as an answer. The next day, she showed up at Aunt Susan's house again, unannounced. I was in my room when I heard the doorbell, followed by Maddie's overly loud, overly sweet voice. I want to talk with Ethan, Maddie said, trying to sound innocent. It's important. Whatever you have to say, you can say it from the porch, Aunt Susan replied. I peeked through my window and saw Maddie standing there, holding a folder like she was about to make some big presentation. Fine, she huffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. I brought some information about Jason's condition. I thought maybe if you both understood how serious this is, you'd reconsider. Aunt Susan didn't say anything, just crossed her arms and waited. Maddie took that as her cue to start her pitch. Jason has been dealing with this for years, she began, pulling papers out of her folder and holding them up like they were some kind of evidence. But now it's gotten to the point where he can't function without surgery. The doctors say it's critical. She went on for a while, detailing how expensive the procedure was and how their insurance wouldn't cover everything. We've already put our savings into this, she said, her voice trembling. But it's not enough. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for help. Just a small portion of the inheritance. It's sitting there unused, and Jason doesn't have time to wait. Aunt Susan didn't budge. Maddie, I understand that this is hard for you, but your father left that money for Ethan. It's not up for discussion. Maddie's face changed instantly. The fake sadness disappeared, replaced by pure anger. You're unbelievable, she snapped. How can you stand there and act like this is about Dad's wishes? You've always hated me. You're just using this as an excuse to punish me. That's enough, Aunt Susan said, her voice icy. You can leave now. Maddie didn't argue. She stormed off, slamming the gate behind her. But I knew this wasn't over. A few days later, Maddie tried a different approach. She started texting me directly, skipping Aunt Susan altogether. At first, it was more guilt-tripping. I can't believe you're letting Aunt Susan control your decisions like this, one message read. You're old enough to think for yourself. When that didn't work, she switched tactics. You know Jason has always supported you, right? She wrote. He was the one who said you could totally get into med school. He believes in you. I can't believe you're turning your back on him now. That one made me laugh out loud. Jason, the guy who mocked me for wanting to be a doctor, suddenly believes in me? Yeah, right. I didn't bother responding, but Maddie didn't stop. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Then came the photo. It was a picture of Jason lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a monitor. Maddie captioned it, "This is what you're ignoring. This is what you're letting happen." I showed it to Aunt Susan, who just shook her head. She's trying to manipulate you, she said. Don't fall for it. When the text didn't work, Maddie escalated. One evening, Aunt Susan got a call from someone she hadn't spoken to in years, our cousin Lauren. Maddie had apparently reached out to her and spun some sob story about how Aunt Susan was hoarding my inheritance and refusing to help a dying man. Lauren called to get Aunt Susan's side of the story, and when Aunt Susan explained what was really happening, Lauren was furious. She tried to make me feel guilty for not stepping in to help, she said. What's wrong with her? It wasn't just Lauren. Over the next week, Maddie reached out to other family members, trying to rally them against Aunt Susan. She framed it like Aunt Susan was some kind of villain, keeping me under her thumb and refusing to help Jason out of spite. Most people saw through her, but a few bought into it, calling Aunt Susan to express their concern. I couldn't believe how far Maddie was willing to go. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about winning. She wanted to break Aunt Susan, to make her cave and give in just so Maddie could feel like she was in control. The breaking point came when Maddie showed up at Aunt Susan's house with a lawyer. She didn't warn us, didn't call ahead. She just showed up, demanding to talk. Aunt Susan answered the door but refused to let Maddie inside. What do you want now? She asked, exasperated. Maddie gestured to the lawyer beside her. I'm filing a legal petition, she said, her tone smug. You've been manipulating Ethan and mishandling the inheritance. I'm asking the court to remove you as custodian and appoint me instead. Aunt Susan didn't even blink. Good luck with that, she said, slamming the door in Maddie's face. After that, it was official. Maddie wasn't just trying to guilt me into giving her the money. She was trying to take it by force. The court date was set, and Aunt Susan and I started preparing with our lawyer, Mr. Carter. Maddie thought she had the upper hand, but she didn't realize how much evidence we had against her. She'd picked the wrong fight, and she was about to find out the hard way. When the court date was set, it felt like the calm before a storm. Maddie's legal petition accused Aunt Susan of manipulating me, mishandling the inheritance, and trying to control my life for her own benefit. It was all complete nonsense, but Maddie was banking on being able to spin her story well enough to convince the court. If she succeeded, the court would appoint her as my guardian, giving her control of the inheritance until I turned 18. She wasn't asking for part of the money. She wanted all of it. Aunt Susan wasn't rattled. She'd been through enough of Maddie's games over the years to know how to stay calm under pressure. We worked closely with Mr. Carter, our lawyer, gathering every piece of evidence we could to show the truth about Maddie's motives. Maddie arrived at court with her lawyer and Jason in tow. He looked out of place, sitting in the back of the courtroom with a scowl on his face like he'd rather be anywhere else. Maddie, on the other hand, was in her element. She walked in like she was the hero of some dramatic story, all fake confidence and exaggerated concern. Her lawyer started by painting her as the caring sister, someone who only wanted what was best for me. My client's sole intention is to protect her brother, the lawyer said. She is deeply concerned about the influence Miss Susan has over him and believes that the inheritance is not being managed in his best interest. I could feel my blood boiling as I listened. Maddie hadn't cared about me or Dad for years, and now she was pretending to be my savior. Aunt Susan must have noticed my clenched fists because she gave me a small nudge, silently telling me to stay calm. When it was our turn, Mr. Carter dismantled Maddie's argument piece by piece. He started with the bank records, which clearly showed that Aunt Susan hadn't touched a single cent of my inheritance. The funds are being held in a custodial account, as outlined in the will, Mr. Carter explained. There is no evidence of mismanagement or improper influence. Then came the part that completely flipped the narrative. Maddie's financial records. Mr. Carter had filed a request for them as part of the case, and the results were exactly what we expected. Maddie had blown through her half of the inheritance in just 6 months. There were charges for a brand new SUV, high-end kitchen appliances, luxury vacations, and countless other unnecessary expenses. It painted a clear picture of someone who was financially irresponsible and desperate. Finally, Mr. Carter presented the text messages and voicemails Maddie had sent me over the past few weeks. The court listened as her voice echoed through the room, pleading, demanding, and even threatening. "You're sitting on all this money while my husband is dying," one voicemail said. "If you don't help, you're going to regret it." The judge's expression hardened as the evidence piled up. Maddie squirmed in her seat, her confidence slipping with every passing minute. Iberdiribia. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and took a deep breath. This was my chance to tell the truth, and I wasn't going to waste it. "Your Honor," I began, "this case isn't about protecting me or my inheritance. It's about my sister refusing to take responsibility for her own choices. Maddie received the exact same inheritance I did, half of everything my dad worked his whole life to leave us. She spent her share on luxury items and vacations, and now she's trying to take what's left of mine to fix her mistakes." I glanced over at Maddie, who was glaring at me with a mix of anger and disbelief, but I didn't stop. Over the past few weeks, Maddie has harassed me with messages, tried to guilt me into giving her money, and even involved other family members in an attempt to pressure me. She's not here to protect me. She's here because she wants control. My aunt, on the other hand, has done nothing but support me. She's been there every step of the way, making sure I stay on track for med school and honoring my dad's wishes. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't even be here today. I sat down, my hands shaking slightly, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd said everything I needed to say, and there was no taking it back. When Maddie got her chance to respond, she doubled down on her sob story. "I've always cared about my brother," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I just want what's best for him. Jason's surgery is life or death, and I thought this family could come together to help. I didn't expect this kind of hostility. It was all so fake it made my skin crawl." Maddie had spent years treating Aunt Susan like an enemy, and now she was trying to frame herself as the victim. But the evidence was stacked against her, and it was clear the judge wasn't buying it. After reviewing everything, the judge delivered the verdict. The evidence clearly shows that Ms. Susan has acted responsibly in her role as custodian of the inheritance. Furthermore, the petitioner's financial history and personal communications reveal a motive that is self-serving, rather than protective of the respondent's interests. The petition is dismissed. Maddie's face turned bright red, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might break a tooth. But the judge wasn't done. This court will also investigate whether the petitioner's claims and submitted evidence constitute perjury or fraud. If found guilty, there will be consequences. After reviewing, she was found guilty of filing false claims and trying to commit fraud, and the consequences hit her hard. They fined her for wasting court resources, ordered her to go to counseling to deal with her manipulative behavior, and slapped her with a restraining order to keep her away from me and my aunt. I could barely contain my relief. Aunt Susan gave my shoulder a small squeeze, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. As we left the courtroom, Maddie tried to catch up to us, but Aunt Susan shut her down with a single look. "We're done here," she said firmly. Maddie stopped in her tracks, her hands balled into fists, but she didn't say anything. She knew she'd lost. Jason stayed silent the whole time, probably realizing there was no way to talk his way out of this mess. The two of them left together, Maddie muttering angrily under her breath, but I didn't care what she had to say anymore. The fight was over, and we'd won. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like I finally had control of my life again. Aunt Susan and I had stood our ground, and Maddie's schemes had backfired spectacularly. She thought she could manipulate me and everyone else to get what she wanted, but in the end, she'd only exposed herself for who she really was. And now, she couldn't touch me, or my future.
Growing up in our small town wasn't easy, especially in our modest two-story house, where the dynamics were always complicated. I'm Molly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who should love you most. My father worked long hours at the local mine. He was quiet, tired, and usually buried himself in the newspaper after dinner. My mother, on the other hand, was anything but quiet. She'd spend endless hours sprawled on our worn-out couch, phone pressed to her ear, cackling with her friends while some mindless talk show droned on in the background. Linda, you won't believe what happened on The Real Housewives today, she'd squeal into the phone, completely ignoring the pile of unwashed dishes in the sink or the empty refrigerator that needed restocking. Then there was my younger brother, Riley. Mom's precious golden child. Even from my earliest memories, the difference in how she treated us was crystal clear. While I wore hand-me-downs and dollar store shoes, Riley got the latest gaming consoles and brand-name clothes. "Mom, my shoes are falling apart," I remember telling her one day when I was 12. "Could we maybe get new ones this weekend?" She barely looked up from her phone. "There's no money for shoes right now, Molly. Besides, those still look fine to me." But later that same week, I watched her return from the mall with a shopping bag full of new clothes for Riley. "Look what I got for my special boy," she cooed, while he eagerly dug through the bag. Dinner was always a testament to her negligence, microwaved frozen dinners or takeout containers scattered across our kitchen table. Sometimes, I'd stare at the sad, plastic-wrapped meals and dream about having a normal mom who actually cooked real food. By the time I reached high school, I knew college wasn't in my future. There were no savings, no college fund, not even discussions about higher education. The reality of our financial situation hit me hard when I overheard my parents arguing one night. "We can't keep living like this," my father's voice was strained. "The bills are piling up." "Well, what do you expect me to do about it?" Mom snapped back. "You're the one who should be making more money." That's when I made my decision. The day I turned 15, I walked into the cafe 3 blocks from our house and asked for a job. The manager, Mrs. Peterson, took one look at my determined face and gave me a chance as a part-time waitress. "You've got good instincts, kid," she told me after my first week. "Keep this up, and you'll go far." For the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. But even that small victory was tainted by my mother's reaction. "A waitress?" she scoffed when I told her about my new job. "Well, I suppose someone has to do it. Just don't let it interfere with taking care of your brother's needs." After graduating high school, I landed a full-time waitressing position at Giovanni's, one of the nicer restaurants in town. My 3 years of experience at the cafe made me an attractive hire, and the manager didn't even hesitate when offering me the job. The salary was significantly better than what I'd been making at the cafe, but that wasn't even the best part. Mr. Romano had this amazing policy where servers could take home leftover food after their shifts. In a high-end Italian restaurant, these weren't just any leftovers, we're talking about gourmet pasta, premium steaks, and fresh-baked desserts that would otherwise go to waste. The first time I brought home a container of fettuccine alfredo and garlic bread, my family's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. I thought this might finally be something that would make them appreciate me. How wrong I was. It quickly became a pattern. I'd bring home these beautiful meals, carefully packed and still warm, only to find that by the time I got a chance to eat, there would be nothing but scraps left. Riley always got first pick, followed by Mom and Dad, and whatever remained, if anything, was supposed to be mine. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I came home with a magnificent portion of osso buco that the chef had specifically saved for me. By the time I finished changing out of my work clothes, I found Riley scraping the last bits from the container. "Hey," I protested. "I was going to eat that. Couldn't you have at least saved me some?" Mom's head snapped up from her phone. "Molly, how dare you be so selfish? You should be ashamed of yourself." "Selfish? I'm the one bringing this food home. You get to eat this fancy food all day at work," she snapped back. "Your brother only gets to enjoy it once a day. You should be grateful we're not asking you to bring more." I stood there, fighting back tears of frustration. "I don't eat at work, Mom. I'm too busy serving other people." "Well, that's your choice," she replied dismissively, already turning back to her phone. "Nobody's stopping you from eating there." Riley just smirked and licked his fork clean, not even bothering to hide his satisfaction. The worst part wasn't even the hunger, it was the realization that in their eyes, I would always be worth less than my brother, no matter what I contributed to the family. 2 years flew by, and Riley finally graduated high school. I remember sitting at his graduation ceremony, watching him receive his diploma, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, things would change now. Maybe he'd finally start contributing to the household like I had been doing since I was 15. "So, Riley," I asked him the day after graduation, while he was sprawled on the couch with his game controller, "have you started looking for jobs yet?" He barely glanced away from his video game. "Nah, I'm taking a gap year. Need some time to figure out what I want to do with my life, you know?" A gap year? I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "But we can barely make ends meet as it is." "Oh, honey," Mom chimed in from her usual spot on the recliner, "Riley's still too young to work. He needs time to find his path." I wanted to scream. Too young? He was the same age I was when I started working full-time. But instead, I took a deep breath and tried to reason with them. "Mom, I started working when I was 15. Riley's 18 now." That was different, Mom waved her hand dismissively. "You wanted to work. Riley needs to focus on his future." And so began Riley's gap year. Every day, I'd leave for my morning shift at the restaurant, and he'd still be asleep. When I'd return in the evening, he'd either be in his room playing video games or out with his friends, the house just as messy as I'd left it. The dishes would pile up in the sink, the trash would overflow, and heaven forbid anyone ask him to help with laundry. I couldn't take it anymore. "Why doesn't he have to work?" I confronted my parents one evening during dinner. "Everyone else his age has a job." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair while Mom immediately went on the defensive. "Stop attacking your brother. You don't understand how hard it is for him. The job market is terrible right now, and he's suffering enough without you making him feel worse." I tried a different approach. "Look, we actually need delivery drivers at the restaurant. I could put in a good word for him. It's a decent starting salary, plus tips." Riley chose that moment to emerge from his cave, presumably for his evening beer run with friends. "A delivery driver?" he scoffed, grabbing his keys from the counter. "I didn't get straight A's to become some delivery boy, Molly. I know my worth." "And what exactly do you think you're worth right now?" I muttered under my breath. He paused at the door, turning to face me with that smug expression I'd grown to despise. "Unlike some people, I have standards. When I get a job, it'll be something worthy of my abilities. Something with a future. Not everyone wants to be a waitress their whole life." The way he said waitress, like it was something dirty, made my blood boil. But before I could respond, he was gone, the screen door slamming behind him. It was Riley's 19th birthday when I finally understood just how deep my family's favoritism ran. That morning, I was getting ready for work when I heard excited voices from outside. Curious, I looked out my window to see my parents presenting Riley with a car. Yes, a car. It wasn't new, a used Honda Civic with some scratches and dents, but it was still a functioning vehicle. I stood there, frozen, watching Riley jump around like a kid at Christmas while Mom took pictures with her phone. I thought about the bus I'd be catching in 30 minutes, the same bus I'd been taking to work for years, rain or shine. The same bus where I'd often stand for the entire 40-minute ride after a grueling 8-hour shift on my feet. "Do you like it, sweetie?" Mom's voice drifted up to my window. "We know it's not brand new, but it's perfect for getting around town." "This is awesome," Riley exclaimed, already sitting in the driver's seat. "I can't wait to show the guys." I didn't say anything before leaving for work. What could I say? That I'd been working for years and couldn't afford a car while my unemployed brother just got one handed to him? That I was tired of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family? But the real surprise came that evening during my shift at Giovanni's. I was serving a table near the window when I saw them walk in, my entire family, dressed in their best clothes, with Riley leading the way like he owned the place. "Molly," Mom waved me over dramatically. "We're here to celebrate Riley's birthday properly." My brother grinned at me. "We want the best table in the banquet hall. My friends Mike and Dave will be here in half an hour." And we want you to be our server, Mom added. Only you. We don't trust anyone else to make this special evening perfect. I wanted to tell them I already had tables assigned in my section, that the banquet hall was typically reserved in advance, that I couldn't just abandon my other customers. But Mr. Romano overheard and, trying to be helpful, rearranged things to accommodate them. What followed was 3 hours of pure humiliation. I served them course after course, while they made endless jokes at my expense. Hey, sis, the water's a bit warm. Don't they teach you proper serving temperature in waitress school? Riley snickered. Molly, dear, you missed a spot when you wiped the table. Maybe that's why you're still just a server, Mom chimed in, while his friends laughed. By the time they finished their elaborate meal, complete with expensive wines and multiple courses, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. But the worst was yet to come. As they gathered their coats, Mom pulled me aside with that fake sweet smile I'd grown to dread. Darling, there's just one tiny thing, she said, lowering her voice. We're a bit short on cash right now. You'll need to cover the bill. Consider it your gift to your brother for his birthday. I stared at the bill in my hand, $247.83. Nearly half my weekly salary. You can't be serious, I whispered. You came here knowing you couldn't pay? Don't be dramatic, Molly, she hissed. It's your brother's birthday. Surely you want to do something nice for him? Besides, you get an employee discount, don't you? They all stood there, watching me, Riley twirling his new car keys, while Mom gave me that expectant look that said I had no choice. And she was right, I couldn't let them walk out without paying. It would cost me my job. 6 months after Riley's extravagant birthday celebration, my own birthday rolled around. That morning, Mom was unusually chipper. Don't make any plans for tonight, sweetie, she sang out as I headed to work. We have a special surprise waiting for you when you get home. For the first time in years, I actually felt hopeful. Maybe they'd finally realized how unfairly they'd been treating me. Maybe they'd finally show me the same kind of appreciation they showed Riley. I spent my entire shift daydreaming about what might be waiting for me, maybe a nice family dinner, perhaps even something special they'd saved up for. I practically rushed home after my shift ended, my heart beating faster as I opened the front door. But what I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. There stood my family, dressed to the nines, Mom in a brand new designer dress that must have cost at least $400, matching shoes that I recognized from the expensive boutique downtown, and Dad and Riley in crisp new suits that definitely weren't from the discount store. Happy birthday, they chorused, but all I could see was the money they were wearing, my money. Here's your gift, sis, Riley smirked, tossing a small package at me. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a perfume box. But something was off. The designer name was misspelled, Gucci, instead of Gucci. The label was crooked, clearly stuck on by hand, and when I sprayed a tiny bit, the chemical smell was so overwhelming it made my eyes water. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Are you kidding me? My voice started low, but quickly rose to a shout. Molly, Mom looked shocked. Don't be ungrateful. Ungrateful? I was screaming now, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. I pay all the bills in this house. I buy the groceries. I give you expensive gifts for every holiday. Keep your voice down, Dad muttered, but I was beyond stopping. You bought Riley a car with my money. I'm still paying for his gas, and he won't even give me a ride to work. I've asked him 3 times, and each time he said he was too busy playing video games. Riley shifted uncomfortably. It's not my fault you can't afford your own car. Because I spend all my money on this family, I grabbed at my hair in frustration. And what do I get for my birthday? Fake perfume that smells like paint thinner while you're all standing there in clothes that cost more than I make in 2 weeks. You're being hysterical, Mom snapped. This is no way to act on your birthday. Hysterical? You want to see hysterical? I snatched up the perfume bottle. This isn't even real. You couldn't even be bothered to get me something that wasn't a cheap knockoff. That's enough, Dad's voice boomed. If you're going to act like this, you can just go to your room and stay there. Yes, Mom added, smoothing her expensive dress. Go celebrate alone until you can behave properly and show some gratitude. I turned and walked to my room without another word, but this time was different. This time I wasn't going to cry. This time I was going to plan. Because in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to get out of this house. Just a week after my disastrous birthday, Mr. Romano called me into his office. I was nervous at first, wondering if my family's behavior during Riley's birthday dinner had finally caught up with me. Molly, he said, gesturing for me to sit down, I've been watching your work here for a long time. You're reliable, professional, and our customers love you. How would you feel about becoming our new receptionist? The position comes with a significant pay raise, of course. What do you say? I nearly cried right there in his office. Yes, absolutely yes. That very afternoon, during my break, I started searching for apartments. With my new salary, I could finally afford to live on my own. It felt like the universe was finally giving me a chance to escape. By some miracle, I found a small one-bedroom apartment just 3 blocks from the restaurant. It wasn't fancy, just a basic kitchen, living room, and bedroom, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was away from my family. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, took one look at my proof of employment from Giovanni's and approved me on the spot. You seem like a responsible young lady, she said as I signed the lease. When would you like to move in? Tomorrow, if possible, I replied, my hands shaking with excitement as I wrote the check for the deposit. That evening at dinner, while Mom was serving her usual microwaved meals, I decided to drop my bomb. I'm moving out tomorrow, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've found an apartment near work. Mom's face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you? How are we supposed to pay our bills? Have you even thought about that? You're being completely selfish. I took a deep breath. Dad has a job. And Riley's perfectly capable of working. Maybe it's time he started contributing. I have devoted my entire life to you children. Mom was in full meltdown mode now, tears streaming down her face. And this is how you repay me? By abandoning your family when we need you most? Riley just sat there, shoving food in his mouth and watching the show like it was another one of his video games. Dad stared at his plate, silent as always. I've heard enough, I said, standing up from the table. I'm leaving tomorrow, and that's final. You ungrateful little, Mom's voice followed me up the stairs, but I tuned it out. I spent the next hour packing my belongings into the few boxes and bags I'd secretly bought over the past week. It wasn't much, some clothes, a few books, my laptop, and the small amount of jewelry I owned. My whole life fit into 4 boxes and 2 duffel bags. When the taxi arrived, I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out the front door, to the sound of Mom's continued screaming about family loyalty and ungrateful children. As the taxi pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of our house in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first month in my new apartment was pure bliss. No drama, no guilt trips, no watching Riley being waited on hand and foot. Just peace and quiet. I could cook what I wanted, watch what I wanted, and most importantly, spend my money how I wanted. Then came the phone call. Molly, Mom's voice was sharp even through the phone. The utility bills are due. I took a deep breath. Mom, I don't live there anymore. I'm not responsible for those bills. We were counting on that money, she screeched. You have an obligation to help your family. No, Mom, I don't. Riley's had a whole month to find a job. He can help now. Your brother can't find work right now. And he needs money, he crashed the car last week and needs repairs. He can't work without a car. I almost laughed at the irony. So he crashed the car you bought with my money, and now you want more of my money to fix it? Not happening. This isn't my problem anymore. The next 6 months were transformative. Without having to support my entire family, I was finally able to save money. I bought myself a used Toyota, nothing fancy, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. No strings attached, no guilt, no obligations. I felt like I could finally breathe. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my parents standing there. My stomach dropped. I had never told them my address. "We need to talk," Mom said, pushing past me into my apartment. Dad followed, looking uncomfortable as usual. "We need money, Molly. Your father's about to be laid off, and Riley still hasn't found work. You have to help us." "No," I said firmly. "I don't have to do anything. We're your family." Mom's voice was rising. "You can't just abandon us." "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not enabling you anymore." Dad finally spoke up. "The mine's cutting back workers. I might not have a job by next month." "Then Riley needs to step up," I replied. "He's had plenty of time to find work." "Fine," Mom's face twisted into something ugly. "If that's how you want to play it, then you'll have problems too." My mother's throat wasn't empty. The very next morning, I woke up to Mrs. Chen frantically banging on my door. "Molly, your car. Someone set it on fire." I ran outside in my pajamas to find my Toyota, my pride and joy that I'd worked so hard for, reduced to a smoking shell in the parking lot. My legs nearly gave out, but then Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm. "I have cameras," she said quickly. "The police are on their way. We caught everything on video." The footage was crystal clear. There was Riley, at 3 a.m., pouring something over my car and lighting a match. He hadn't noticed the security cameras tucked away in the building's eaves, hadn't even thought to look for them. He just did his work quickly and walked away as my car went up in flames, probably thinking he'd never be caught. The police arrested him within hours. My phone started ringing almost immediately. "You have to drop the charges." Mom was hysterical. "He's your brother. You can't let them take him to jail." "Actually, I can," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "But I'll make you a deal, reimburse me for the car, and I'll withdraw my statement." "We don't have that kind of money. You know that. Then Riley can face the consequences of his actions. For once in his life." "You heartless little," I hung up before she could finish. The trial was quick. The evidence was undeniable, and Riley had priors I hadn't even known about. Apparently, he'd been in trouble for vandalism before, but my parents had always managed to sweep it under the rug. This time, there was no sweeping. He got 3 years and was ordered to pay restitution equal to the value of my car. My parents eventually took out a loan to pay me back, probably hoping I'd drop the charges if they did. But it was too late. Riley had already been sentenced. He served 1.5 years before getting out on good behavior, though I only heard this through distant relatives who occasionally update me on family gossip. They tell me my parents still live in the same house, struggling more than ever. Dad's health is failing, but he keeps working at the mine because he has to. Mom spends her days lamenting about her poor boy whose life was ruined by his sister. Riley, unsurprisingly, still doesn't have a job. Turns out having an arson conviction makes it even harder to find that prestigious position he always thought he deserved. Sometimes, friends ask me if I feel guilty. If maybe I was too harsh. They ask if I ever think about reaching out, trying to mend fences. Would you give a second chance to someone who tried to destroy everything you worked for? I ask them back. Would you trust people who watched you struggle for years while they spoiled someone else? The truth is, I don't regret any of it. My family made their choices, years and years of choices, and now they're living with the consequences. They chose to enable Riley's laziness and entitlement. They chose to treat me like their personal ATM. They chose to threaten me when I stopped playing along. And finally, Riley chose to commit a crime, thinking he'd get away with it like he got away with everything else. I'm done feeling guilty about their choices. These days, my life is peaceful. I still live in the same apartment. Mrs. Chen actually reduced my rent after the incident, saying she'd never had such a good tenant. I'm still working at Giovanni's, but now I'm the head receptionist. I've been saving money again. Not for another car, though I did eventually get one, with better insurance this time, but for something bigger. Next fall, I'm starting college, part-time at first, but it's a start. I'm going to study business management. Maybe someday I'll open my own restaurant. From my earliest memories, the contrast between how they treated me and my younger sister Katie was stark and painful. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how my own family betrayed me, and how I rose above it all. Katie was born just a year after me, and from the moment she arrived, it was clear she would be the golden child. Our parents, Mark and Sarah Harrison, showered her with attention while I lingered in the shadows. Every milestone, every achievement, every moment seemed to revolve around Katie. I remember my 10th birthday vividly. While Katie had received a lavish party with bouncy castles and professional entertainers just months before, my celebration consisted of a simple cake after dinner. "We're a bit tight on money this month," Emily, Mom had said, though somehow they managed to buy Katie a new iPad the following week. The disparity went beyond material things. When Katie spoke at dinner, our parents hung on her every word. When I tried to share my day, Dad would often cut me off with a distracted "that's nice, honey," while scrolling through his phone. The weight of their indifference was crushing. But the most frustrating part was the food situation. Katie had a severe peanut allergy, and instead of just managing her diet separately, my parents enforced a complete peanut ban in our house. I loved peanut butter sandwiches, they were my favorite lunch, but I wasn't allowed to have them, even at school. "It's not fair," I remember telling my grandmother Rose one afternoon while helping her bake cookies. "Why do I have to eat everything Katie eats? I don't have allergies." Grandma Rose was my sanctuary, the one person who saw me for who I was. Her warm kitchen became my refuge, a place where I could speak freely without fear of being dismissed or overlooked. "Your parents are making a mistake, sweetheart," she'd say, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "They think they're doing what's best, but they're not seeing how it affects you." I watched her measure flour into a bowl, the familiar motions comforting. Yesterday, Mom bought Katie new dance shoes because she said she might want to take lessons. But when I asked to join the science club, she said it was too expensive. Grandma Rose's face hardened. "I've tried talking to your mother about this, Emily. Just last week, I told her she needs to treat you both equally." "But Sarah," she sighed, shaking her head. "She claims Katie is more talented, more outgoing. Says you're too introverted, that it's harder to connect with you." Her words stung, but they weren't surprising. I'd overheard similar conversations before, my parents discussing how Katie was the special one, the daughter with all the potential. Meanwhile, I was just there. The quiet one, the less talented one. The one they had to accommodate but never really saw. While Katie's schedule was packed with dance classes, piano lessons, and art workshops, I spent my afternoons alone in my room, watching life pass by through my window. "Katie has such natural talent," Mom would gush at dinner. "Her dance instructor says she could go professional someday." Dad would beam with pride, while I pushed my food around my plate, invisible as always. But everything changed when I turned 12. Grandma Rose showed up one Saturday morning, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Get your coat, Emily," she announced. "I've enrolled you in the Advanced Young Scientists program at the community center." That program changed my life. Suddenly, I was immersed in a world of experiments, equations, and endless possibilities. Our instructor, Dr. Chen, didn't see a quiet introvert, he saw a curious mind hungry for knowledge. When I correctly solved a complex algebra problem in my first week, he high-fived me in front of the whole class. By 14, I wasn't just excelling in science and math, I was standing at podiums, articulating arguments about climate change and social justice. People actually listened when I spoke. The shy girl who used to hide in her room was gone, replaced by someone confident, someone with opinions and the courage to express them. Emily's presentation on renewable energy was outstanding, my debate coach told my parents at a school meeting. She has a real future in scientific research if she wants it. I'll never forget Katie's face that day, the way her smile tightened, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to sharing the spotlight, and my growing popularity at school clearly bothered her. The changes were obvious to everyone. People started stopping by my locker between classes. I was elected to the student council. Suddenly, I had friends who valued my opinions, who invited me to study groups and weekend hangouts. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That's when Katie started her whisper campaign. "Mom, Dad," I heard her one evening, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I saw Emily behind the gym today. She was kissing Tommy Martinez. And last week, it was Jake from her debate team." I burst into the kitchen. "That's a lie. I've never." "Katie wouldn't make this up," Mom cut me off. "She's worried about you, Emily. These boys, these late-night study sessions, it's not appropriate." "But I'm just..." "No more going out after 6, Dad announced. And we'll be monitoring your phone calls from now on. It's for your own good, Emily." "What about my debate team meetings? My science club?" "You can participate in school activities," Mom said. "But afterward, you come straight home. No exceptions." I looked at Katie, who was hiding a smirk behind her hand. She'd won again, and we both knew it. My newfound freedom was being stripped away, all because of her lies. As we grew up, Katie's antagonism toward me grew more pronounced. It wasn't enough for her to control my social life through our parents. She started targeting my belongings and the few friendships I'd managed to maintain despite the restrictions. One morning, I found my science project drenched in water, the careful calculations I'd spent weeks on bleeding into illegible smears. Another time, my favorite sweater, a birthday gift from Grandma Rose, mysteriously ended up with bleach stains. But the worst was what she did to my friendship with Rachel. We'd been close since middle school, bonding over our love of biology and bad reality TV shows. Rachel was one of the few friends who stuck by me despite Katie's previous rumors, but even she had her breaking point. "How could you?" Rachel confronted me one day at my locker, her eyes filled with tears. "Katie told me everything, how you write about Matt in your diary, how you're planning to steal him from me." "Rachel, that's insane. I don't even have a diary, and I've never..." But Rachel was already walking away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. That evening, I cornered Katie in her room. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Why do you have to destroy everything good in my life?" "You're paranoid, Emily," she replied coolly. "Maybe if you stopped obsessing over me and making up stories, you'd have more friends." I wanted to scream. Somehow, she always managed to twist things around, making me sound like the crazy one. And our parents? They never questioned her version of events. Then came Katie's 15th birthday. Mom spent days preparing for it, determined to make it perfect. The house was decorated with pink and gold balloons, and relatives filled every corner of our living room. The cake was Mom's masterpiece, 3 tiers of vanilla buttercream, Katie's favorite. Everyone gathered around to sing "Happy Birthday," and Katie blew out her candles to enthusiastic applause. But something was wrong. After a few bites, Katie's face changed. Her hand went to her throat, her eyes widening in panic. Mom recognized the signs immediately, an allergic reaction. "The EpiPen," Dad shouted, already running for Katie's emergency kit. Mom held Katie's hand while Dad administered the injection, and gradually, her breathing steadied. The party atmosphere evaporated instantly. Relatives huddled in concerned groups while my parents tried to understand what had happened. "How did peanuts get in the cake?" Mom kept asking, checking and rechecking her recipe. I was so careful. That's when Katie spoke up, her voice still raspy. "I saw Emily in the kitchen earlier. She was doing something with the cake." "What? No," I protested. "I wasn't even near the cake." But Katie pressed on. "Check her purse," she whispered. "The blue one, by the door." Dad grabbed my purse before I could react. And there it was, a small jar of peanut butter, one I'd never seen before, sitting right on top of my wallet. She could have died. Dad's voice boomed through the living room. What were you thinking, Emily? I stood there, trembling, as my parents hurled accusations at me. The jar of peanut butter in Dad's hand might as well have been a smoking gun. I didn't do it, I repeated, my voice getting smaller each time. Please, you have to believe me. Katie sat on the couch, an oxygen mask still near her face, but I caught the slight upturn of her lips. She was enjoying this, enjoying watching my world crumble around me. Our relatives shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Aunt Jane pulled her daughter closer, as if I might try to poison her next. Uncle Bob wouldn't even meet my eyes. The only person who moved toward me instead of away was Grandma Rose. Now wait just a minute, Grandma's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone needs to calm down and think about this rationally. Did anyone see Emily put it there? This needs to be properly investigated. Everything is already clear, Dad interrupted. Emily, go to your room. We'll deal with this later. The next few days were a nightmare. At home, my parents acted like I was invisible. They'd leave the room when I entered, lock away all the food, and whisper behind closed doors. At school, word spread quickly. People moved away when I walked down the hallways, as if attempted murder was contagious. After 3 days of this torture, I couldn't take it anymore. I found Katie alone in her room, scrolling through her phone. You need to tell them the truth, I said, closing the door behind me. This has gone far enough. Katie looked up, and the smile she gave me was chilling. You know what's funny, she said, setting her phone down. I've been planning this for months. Waiting for the perfect moment. The birthday party was just perfect timing. Something snapped inside me. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and hurt exploded. I lunged at her, grabbing her shoulders. We crashed to the floor, knocking over her bedside lamp. The noise brought our parents running. They found us wrestling on the ground, both screaming. She confessed, I shouted as Dad pulled me off Katie. She just told me she planned the whole thing. She planted the peanut butter in my purse. Stop lying, Katie shrieked, crocodile tears already flowing. See? She's crazy. She attacked me. That's enough. Mom's voice was ice cold. Pack your things, Emily. We can't have you in this house anymore. What? No, please. You're dangerous, Dad declared. We'll call your grandmother. Either she picks you up by morning, or we're calling social services. I fell to my knees, begging them to listen, to understand. But their faces were stone. Katie stood behind them, and through my tears, I could see her satisfied smile. Grandma arrived at dawn, her ancient station wagon idling in our driveway. As I loaded my hastily packed bags into her car, she confronted my parents one last time. What you're doing is despicable, she told them. You're choosing to believe a lie over your own daughter. Someday you'll realize what you've done, and it'll be too late. They didn't respond. They just stood in the doorway, Katie between them, watching as Grandma drove me away from the only home I'd ever known. Living with Grandma Rose was like finally being able to breathe after years of suffocation. Within a month, she had legally adopted me, handled all the paperwork for my transfer to Riverside High School, and converted her sewing room into my bedroom. At Riverside, nobody knew about the birthday party incident or Katie's lies. I was just the new girl with good grades and a quiet smile. Slowly, I started making friends again, real friends this time, who didn't have Katie whispering poison in their ears. I threw myself into my studies with renewed passion. Without Katie's drama and my parents' constant criticism, I flourished. My SAT scores were nearly perfect. I graduated as valedictorian, my speech focusing on resilience and the power of second chances. My parents didn't come to the graduation ceremony. I'd sent them an invitation, more out of formality than hope, but received no response. It hurt, but less than I expected. Grandma Rose's proud tears as I accepted my diploma meant more than their absence. I'd been accepted to several prestigious medical programs, but the tuition fees were daunting. Before I could even mention student loans, Grandma Rose pulled out a folder. "I've been saving for this since you were 12, she said, showing me her college fund for me. "I always knew you were meant for great things." Those 4 years of dental school were intense but rewarding. I lived in a tiny apartment near campus, worked part-time at a cafe, and studied until my eyes burned. Through it all, Grandma Rose was my rock, listening to my excited phone calls about successful procedures, and never once doubting my chosen path. I had no contact with my parents or Katie during this time. Sometimes I'd see updates about them on social media: Katie's job at a local retail store, Mom's garden club awards, Dad's bowling league victories. I'd scroll past them quickly, refusing to let their lives intersect with mine. Finally, after years of hard work, I held my dental license in my hands. My first job offer came from Brighton Dental Associates, one of the most respected private practices in the city. I posted a photo of my diploma and license on Facebook, adding a simple caption: "Dr. Emily Harrison, DDS. Dreams do come true." The response was overwhelming. Old school friends, distant relatives, even my third-grade teacher left congratulatory comments. Aunt Jane, who'd pulled her daughter away from me at that fateful birthday party, wrote, "We're all so proud of you, Emily." Uncle Bob posted, "Incredible achievement, kiddo." Looking at those messages, I realized something profound. I'd done more than just survive my family's betrayal, I'd transformed it into fuel for my success. My phone rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The number was familiar, though I hadn't seen it flash across my screen in years. "Mom." My hand shook as I debated whether to answer. "Hello?" I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Emily, sweetie." Mom's voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used to use when asking Katie's teachers for deadline extensions. "We saw your announcement about becoming a dentist. We're so proud of you." I said nothing, waiting. "We've been thinking about you," she continued, filling my silence. "Your father and I, well, we'd love to have you over for dinner. Just to catch up. As a family." I shouldn't have agreed. Every instinct told me to decline. But curiosity, or maybe that stubborn little part of me that still craved their approval, won out. "What time?" I heard myself asking. The next evening, I pulled up to my childhood home in my new Mercedes. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling slightly around the windows. I dressed carefully: designer blouse, tailored pants, the pearl earrings Grandma Rose had given me for graduation. Armor, in its own way. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Emily." She moved as if to hug me, then seemed to think better of it. Come in, you look so professional." Dad stood awkwardly in the living room. "Hey, kiddo." He'd aged more than I expected, his hair completely gray now, new lines around his eyes. "Is Katie joining us?" I asked, noting the table was set for 3. "Oh, no, she's busy tonight," Mom said quickly. "I made your favorite, pot roast." "Well, what used to be your favorite?" Dinner was a strange dance of forced smiles and careful questions. They asked about dental school, about my practice, about where I was living now. I answered politely but briefly, offering no openings for deeper conversation. "So," Dad said, pushing his potatoes around his plate, "dentistry must be lucrative?" And there it was. "I do all right," I replied neutrally. "She drives a Mercedes, Mark," Mom commented, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "And you mentioned an apartment, Emily?" "Yes, I bought a place downtown." "With a mortgage, of course." They exchanged glances. Mom set down her fork with a sigh that seemed rehearsed. "Emily, we've been having some difficulties," she began. "Your father, well, the company downsized last month. And my arthritis is making it harder to maintain my full schedule at the salon." "That must be tough," I said, taking a sip of water. "We were wondering." Dad cleared his throat. That is, maybe you could. Have you asked Katie for help? I interrupted. Mom's face fell. Katie's struggling too. Retail doesn't pay much, and she's barely making ends meet as it is. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your situation, but I won't be able to help. I heard them calling after me as I walked to my car, but I didn't look back. The message from Mom came during my lunch break at the clinic. Emily, we need $20,000. Your father and I are about to lose the house. As our daughter, you have an obligation to help us. I stared at my phone, a strange calm settling over me. Finally, an opportunity. I'll give you the money, I typed back, on one condition: publicly admit on social media that I never put peanuts in Katie's birthday cake. Admit that you threw me out of the house because of Katie's lies. Tell everyone the truth. The typing bubble appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, after what seemed like hours, her response came through: we can't do that. It would destroy our family's reputation in the community. People would judge us. Surely you understand? I laughed without humor. Then you understand that I won't be giving you any money. Surely you understand? The response was immediate this time: after everything we've done for you. I turned off my phone and went back to work. 2 hours later, during my afternoon break, I saw Katie's name light up my screen. Something made me hit the record button before answering. Hello, Katie. You heartless bitch, she snarled, her voice dripping with venom. Mom's crying because of you. They're about to lose everything, and you're playing games? I'm not playing games, I replied calmly. I'm asking for the truth. I want them to admit what they did to me. What you did to me. Never going to happen, sis. You know why? Because it would hurt me. And they'll never do anything to hurt their precious Katie. Her voice took on a sing-song quality. They've always loved me more, you know. Even after I told them about the peanut butter. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Oh, didn't you know? She laughed again, the sound chilling. A few months after you left, I told them I planted that jar in your purse. They didn't even care. Dad just said it was probably for the best that you were gone anyway. That's how much they prefer me over you. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. You admitted it to them? Of course I did. I was so proud of my plan, I had to tell someone. And guess what? They didn't care. Each word was punctuated with malicious glee. They'll never admit it publicly because it would make me look bad. So you can forget about your little confession demand. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at my phone, the recording safely saved. After all these years, I finally had proof. My sister's voice, admitting to everything: the setup, the lies, our parents' willful blindness. With steady hands, I crafted the Facebook post that would change everything. No dramatics, no accusations, just the truth, finally set free. Many of you remember the incident at my sister's 15th birthday party, I wrote. The day my parents kicked me out of their house for allegedly trying to harm my sister with peanuts. For years, I've carried the weight of that false accusation. Today, I'm sharing my story not out of vengeance, but because the truth deserves to be heard. I detailed everything: the years of favoritism, Katie's escalating lies, my parents' blind devotion to her. I explained how they'd recently reached out, not to apologize, but to demand $20,000 from me. And now, I wrote, I have proof of what really happened that day. Listen to this recent conversation with my sister. I attached the audio file. Katie's voice, clear as day, bragging about planting the peanut butter in my purse. Admitting that our parents knew the truth but chose to protect her anyway. The cruel laugh as she described their indifference to ruining my life. Within minutes, the post exploded. Aunt Jane wrote a lengthy apology. Uncle Bob called me directly, his voice thick with tears as he expressed his regret for believing the lies. Even my old friend Rachel reached out, finally understanding why our friendship had really ended. Then came the angry messages from my family. "Take that down immediately," Mom demanded via text. "You're destroying this family," Dad bellowed in a voicemail. "I'll sue you for recording me without permission," Katie threatened. I responded to them all with the same message: all communications are being recorded and archived. My lawyer has copies of everything. Any threats or harassment will be dealt with legally. Please do not contact me again unless it's through proper legal channels. They must have finally realized I wasn't that powerless teenage girl anymore. The messages stopped. The calls ended. The social media harassment ceased. Grandma Rose came over the night after I made the post, carrying a bottle of champagne. "To the truth," she said, pouring us each a glass. "And to you, my brave girl. I couldn't have done any of this without you," I told her, fighting back tears. "You were the only one who believed in me when everyone else turned away." She took my hand, her eyes bright with pride. "I never doubted you for a second. And look at you now, successful, strong, finally free of their lies. Do you think they'll ever admit what they did? Try to make amends?" Grandma Rose shook her head. "Some people would rather live with their lies than face the truth about themselves. But that's their burden to bear, not yours." She was right, of course. She usually is. My parents and Katie chose their path long ago, just as I chose mine. They'll have to live with the consequences of their choices, just as I built a life from mine. These days, I focus on my practice, my friends, and my relationship with Grandma Rose, the one true parent I've ever known. The past doesn't haunt me anymore.